Because I'm a good negotiator. I have negotiated a number of situations in the past. I know how to manage crises.
A few moments later.
It's interesting. I mean, the Ford government has overseen a province whose economy has underperformed the rest of the country.
It's really rare to see that. Typically, Ontario's unemployment rate is in line with the country or better. And you have Atlantic provinces that typically have a higher unemployment rate. Then now it's completely opposite. So a lot of the industries that are affected by the uncertainty around the trade war are in Ontario. Plus, we had a 15-year bull market in housing, which we're probably starting to see a little bit of an overhang. And unemployment going up is not helping. Historically, you only see mortgage defaults going up when unemployment rises.
Okay, well, we got to give you an update here on our dear friends up north, because around the August 1st tariff deadline set by the Trump administration, we notably covered the fact that in the end, there was no trade deal made between Canada and the United States after Liberal Prime Minister Mark Carney decided to play political games instead of making a serious negotiation that would benefit his country. And so hence Trump basically said, okay, Canada, screw you, deal with a 35% tariff on non-USMCA exempt goods. So today I want to do the follow-up video and ask the question, how is Canada and Canada's economy doing after this Liberal fool, if you may remember, made the whole Canadian campaign about elbows up, we're going to stand up to Donald Trump, all the Canadians are going to stick together. Yeah, well, newsflash, it is not going so well. As a matter of fact, the new July jobs report out of Canada may be signaling here a major economic crisis, largely because of, on one hand, Liberal policies, but on top of that, the fact that they refuse to actually do something about it. Instead of saying, hey, we have a massive problem here, maybe we should negotiate with the United States. Maybe we are not an economy currently in a position to be fighting this trade war, playing these games. Well, Canada, ultimately, this is what people unfortunately voted for. We tried to warn you that you ought not to let your Trump derangement syndrome destroy your own country. Okay, we have plenty of liberals in America already who are willing to do that. Nonetheless, here you have it, and it is an utter disaster, ladies and gentlemen, as we speak. It's actually really sad, frankly. I frankly feel bad for the people of Canada, specifically the young people, but it is what it is. We'll give you this chronicle again, updates here on Canada. How are they doing with the new tariffs in today's video? So folks, do us a favor as usual. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Subscribing is not only the best way to support our work, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And with that said, let us briefly recap, of course, what happened around August 1st. This, of course, was the deadline after which if a trade deal was not made, or at least the framework of a trade deal was not being prepared between the United States and our major trading partners, that the Liberation Day tariffs would indeed go back into effect. Now, as I noted at the time, the vast majority of America's major trading partners were exempt from this because of the fact that most smart nations came to the table and made deals, right? The European Union came to the table, Asian nations came to the table. There was one country that notably stuck out here, and it was Liberal Prime Minister Mark Carney and the government of Canada playing these political games. And so what Trump told them about 2 weeks ago was, okay, well, we warned you, right? It's a case of F around and find out, all your elbows up, all your unseriousness, not taking the negotiations seriously. Well, here you go, Canada. Basically, enjoy a bunch of new tariffs. And, it didn't have to be like this. But again, this is unfortunately the clownery that people voted for. Go figure.
Trump putting pressure on Canada on the eve of a trade deadline, hours before making his threats real.
We like Canada. I love Canada. I have so many friends in Canada. But they've been very poorly led. They've been very, very poorly led. And all we want is fairness for our country.
Tonight News, he signed an executive order increasing the tariff on Canada from 25% to 35% effective Friday. In Ottawa, Mark Carney had spent the day in his office as his team in Washington competed on the ground for the White House's attention.
We haven't spoken to Canada today. He's called, and we'll see.
In the White House document, he complains Canada has failed to cooperate in curbing the ongoing flood of fentanyl and has retaliated against the United States for the president's.
And of course, I think the funniest part of the entire chronicle is the way in which Prime Minister Mark Carney, at the very last minute, literally on July 31st, less than 24 hours before the new tariffs are set to take effect, suddenly stopped playing games, right? At the very last minute, essentially like the kid who procrastinates on the final project for the entire semester and then tries to do it all in one night, suddenly picks up the phone, pleading with President Trump, hey, let's make a deal, let's do something. And essentially, Trump said, no, screw you, you're unserious. You had actually the longest time period of any nation on the planet to make this trade deal, because remember, it all started with Canada. You didn't take it seriously. We're not going to listen to you now beg and whine, right? These are the consequences of your own actions. And of course, that's highly ironic because if you remember back to the campaign trail, the reason why Mark Carney was campaigning against the conservatives, I should say, was off of this premise that he's going to be a good negotiator, right? He was telling the Canadian people that, oh, we need to stand up and be tough with Trump. I'm a former businessman. I used to be a good negotiator and I know exactly what I'm doing here. And well, newsflash, guys, it would appear here that these empty threats about how he was going to get a good deal for Canadians and Trump is a bully, he needs to be stood up to, are not exactly going so well because, newsflash, not only has he not gotten a good deal for Canada, he's not gotten any deal for Canada.
But he can handle him. We can handle him. We are going to handle him. We are going to handle him. We can handle him. We can handle Donald Trump. That's what he misses. And I'm going to go into that.
President Trump thinks Canada will cave in. We will never, ever bow down to a bully. Canadians will always stick together. And we won't stand by as tariffs hurt our workers and their families. Canadians need to remain united. Now, let me be clear. This situation, unfortunately, could not be more serious. And at times like these, we need serious leadership and a serious plan. I'm ready to stand up for Canada. Who's with me?
Okay, Mr. Tough Guy. Well, how's that going? Huh? How is standing up to the bully going? By the way, does serious leadership and a serious plan look like picking up the phone in a panic and calling the president a million times right before, one day before the deadline goes into effect and saying, hey, please make a deal. Please don't do this. Is that your serious plan? You know, it's just actually laughable here. And of course, ever since then, Mark Carney, once he got into office and realized that he's losing this battle, it's not really a fight he should be picking to begin with, has completely changed his tone, because it's worth noting Canada was only one of two nations, China there being the other one, to retaliate against Liberation Day and do retaliatory tariff measures against the United States. And as a result of that, I think what the Canadians were betting on was this idea that, oh, Liberation Day is going to be this massive change to the global trade order, not in the sense that America is going to be getting better deals, but rather that, oh, we're going to form like this global trade coalition against the United States, right? So you had Mark Carney saying Canada's going to team up with Europe, Canada's going to team up with Asia, we don't need the US. But in response, what has happened since is no, actually, no other major nations, not even China actually, followed Canada in this new anti-American crusade, right? The Asian nations almost all made trade deals, right? Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, many others there. And even the EU, as we recently covered, of course, made that trade deal. And so now Canada, after picking this fight and nobody ultimately wanted to follow them, is basically sitting here isolated. And I would argue, by the way, as I said at the time, I think that's what caused a lot of the last minute panic. It was Mark Carney watching 1 week before the deadline. Japan trade deal came in. EU trade deal came in. He's like, shoot, everyone else is doing this. I got to do something. So there's this, of course, serious leadership and a serious plan not going so well.
We will have a discussion on the current state of negotiations with the United States. I will say that, as you are aware, our senior ministers, my chief of staff, myself, were engaged in continuous discussions. Minister LeBlanc will be reinforcing those discussions over the next few days in Washington with the United States. We are looking for the best deal for Canada. We're only going to accept the best deal for Canada. That is very much informed by our discussions. We understand as well that we all understand that the global trade environment is changing, and there are some countries that are pulling back, that are restricting market access. But there's even more countries that are opening up to market access, and the premiers have helped lead this with individual trade initiatives to Asia, to Europe, with partners around the world, and we are building on those. And part of what we will discuss is how we can be best coordinated to building positive trade relationships with reliable partners.
Yeah, well, it's worth noting this was from about the later middle of July. Ever since then, Mark Carney, of course, has not gotten a deal with the U.S., so much for that. And he's not gotten this new realigned trading partnership with Europe and Asia, because Europe and Asia, ever since this moment where he spoke too soon, guess what did what? Made trade deals with the United States. That leaves Canada, of course, alone in the world here. Now, with that said, I think it is worth highlighting two things. You could argue, first of all, just the overall state of the Canadian economy. It's like, are you really in a position to be fighting a trade war here? But also, secondly, this is also true here, the impact that some of the tariffs are having on Canada. And again, guys, we're not rooting for this. We don't want it to come to this. We want to have a good deal. The fact that Mark Carney refuses to negotiate or refuses to be a serious actor is not the fault of President Donald Trump. But with all of that in mind, here is the current state of Liberal leadership, of course, in Canada, both on a domestic level and on the level of international trade. The two problems just compound each other, because guess what? Incompetent leadership is incompetent leadership. All of that said, recently the July jobs report just released from the nation of Canada, and there's varying sort of statistics here, but the unilateral consensus is that the Canadian economy lost somewhere between 41,000 to 60,000 jobs. As you can see here, according to StatsCan, they're highlighting or estimating that the Canadian economy lost 41,000 jobs. Young people were hardest hit. And by the way, it's the opposite picture of the United States. This is not Doge cuts or something obviously happening. No, rather, jobs were lost, guess where? In the private sector, while public sector jobs increased slightly, which kind of actually kept the Canadian employment rate stable simply because of government jobs, okay? So, typical, situation, I guess you could see in that nation. Another different statistic here is citing that they lost 51,000 full-time jobs, but check out how dystopian this is. So you lose 51,000 full-time jobs, but the kind of countermeasure is that they gained 10,000 part-time jobs. Yeah, that's what economic dystopia looks like. Hey, your full-time job that actually pays your living wage, screw that. Here, you want a part-time job where you can't even afford the rent, which is already insanely expensive in that state. Guys, needless to say, total and complete disaster. They lost 3,000 manufacturing jobs, 26,000 retail jobs. Again, Mark Carney, you shouldn't be messing around with the United States. You should be figuring out a way to fix your own economy. You're facing a severe crisis here, worse even than the other Western nations. And amidst all of it, instead of opening a deal with the United States, you're saying, hey, let me stand up and try to be a tough guy against the United States. You're in no position to negotiate here, right? You do not have the cards. It's simply the honest truth.
Canada's unemployment rate has jumped to 6.9%. 15.4% of young men are unemployed. Women aged 25 to 54 lost 60,000 full-time jobs in April alone. 30,600 manufacturing jobs and 26,800 retail jobs are gone. Ontario's auto industry, which includes 144,000 jobs, are on the edge, while our GDP per capita continues to fall. A GDP per capita that has been declining at an annual rate of 0.4%, marking the worst economic performance among 50 developed nations. And what's the federal government's solution? Well, they skewed the data by adding 37,000 temporary jobs in the public sector. Without these temporary government hires, April's unemployment numbers would have been catastrophic. Since 2015, the public sector has added over 110,000 new jobs, increasing the federal workforce by 43%, while the private sector suffers a death from 1,000 cuts. However, when your public sector grows but your private sector continues to shrink, there's nobody left to pay the bills. Economist Jack Mintz calls this just the start of Canada's manufacturing erosion, blaming Trump's trade war as the culprit, but tariffs aren't the full story. The real problem here is Canada's vulnerability, created by years of bloated government, stifled industry, socialist economics, and blind faith in the U.S. market. We're watching a private sector collapse in real time, while the government clings to Keynesian ideology and an ever-increasing payroll.
Well, you can see Carney and the Liberal government's response and solution to all of this, which is apparently, hey, let's not negotiate with the U.S. Let's not deregulate and fix our own economy so that the private sector actually can grow. No, let's just put a Band-Aid on all of this by increasing and probably taking out more debt to grow the public sector, add more government jobs, and then we'll say, look, our unemployment is doing great. Meanwhile, the GDP per capita is collapsing. The private sector is collapsing. I think you basically get the picture here again. And by the way, just to think, after a decade of this trend already happening, what did Canadians do in the 2025 election? They re-elected the Liberal Party simply to spite Donald Trump. Yeah, well, how's that going for the Liberal voters out there? You know, the whole you regret where you voted for yet? Yeah, Canadians, do you regret where you voted for yet? Huh? Before you, of course, ask us that very question. Worth noting here as well that the youth unemployment crisis, which is a big problem, by the way, to be fair to Canada, a big problem in basically every major Western nation. But here you go, and you can see Canada's youth unemployment rate is currently 14.6%. 14% unemployment rate, almost 15%. For youth and young people, which is the highest since 2010. If you want a picture of what this looks like right here, I mean, check out this video. This is out of the Hamilton job fair, as you can see. And you can see young people here lining up for hours. The line goes, it looks like the Great Depression, does it not? Young people way on for almost a mile here, just lining up, hoping they can get a job. This is how bad the crisis is. And is Mark Carney thinking to do anything sensible? Is he thinking, first of all, to fix his own immigration problem? Because that's, a major factor here, contributing to youth unemployment, the supposed economic gains, much like the same situation we have here in America, have not been realized. No, he's not doing that. Right? He's just saying to the young people of his nation, screw you, screw the actual Canadians here. Is he thinking to make a trade deal with the United States to say, okay, let's get this trade pressure off of our backs. Let's maybe even do something that can create jobs for ourselves? No. Right? Let's play political games, of course, while you literally have young people. This picture will go down in history, by the way. Someday you're going to read about this in Canadian history textbooks. That said, I mean, you can basically see the picture here. The highest unemployment rate is in the province of Ontario, which contains a lot of the auto manufacturing sector. Yeah, guess what? That's why you ought to maybe make a deal here. Currently reaching 8% almost. It's been increasing ever since Trump started applying the trade pressure and Mark Carney refused to do anything about it. Currently, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF here, right, is projecting here in the future for Canada, they can expect their real GDP growth to fall by 4.9%, even more than it already has, right? Any of you guys ever seen that infamous graph of GDP per capita of the US and Canada? And they're basically the same for many decades. And the moment that 2015 starts and Justin Trudeau takes power, US keeps growing at the same rate. Canada basically takes a nosedive, right? Unemployment, by some accounts, is even rising actually their projection here, I should say. Unemployment is set to rise to all the way to 9.6%. 9.6% unemployment. That is insane. Right? That is depression numbers, obviously. Short-term inflation will go up even more. Interest rates will rise. Stocks are projected to fall 33%. House prices fall 25%. Wages will fall by 0.5%. And oil will fall by 33%. This is not even entirely because of Trump's trade policies. But guess what? Mark Carney, instead of fixing any of this, is deciding he doesn't need the United States, right? Of course, the new solution that he has announced in response to the August 1st tariffs is saying, and I quote, Canadians will be our own best customer, right? Basically saying, we're all we got, we're all we need. So the problem is, when you look at the state of the current Canadian economy, I'm not sure the nationalism suddenly is going to work so well, especially with Liberals in charge, especially, by the way, with a massive immigration problem you refuse to do anything about. By the way, it's worth noting, even on the front of Mark Carney, because he used to be a New York investor before he came back home to Canada, even he doesn't believe this. You know how you know that? Because 95%, according to Mark Nixon here, 95% of Mark Carney's money is circulating still in the United States. That's where he's keeping his assets and his investment, right? Only 3% of it is in Canada. So he is asking the Canadian people to basically sacrifice something that he himself does not believe in. That is truly sad to witness. And guys, the news this week has even gotten worse, because ever since then, what the Canadian government basically tried to do was reach out to Mexico for a bilateral trade agreement, basically saying, look, to the other North American partner here, clearly we're not getting along with the U.S. We have a mutual interest. Maybe we can make our own trade deal separate, and that will really own and spite Trump. But guess what happened here? Mexico said no. Mexico rejected Canada's request for their own separate trade deal. As you can see, Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum is stating that there is, quote, no need for a new bilateral trade deal. She dismissed the need for a new bilateral trade agreement with Canada, highlighting the existing trade deal, by the way, which was negotiated by Donald Trump, talking about USMCA there. So that's gotta hurt. But the existing trade deal with the USA, Canada, and Mexico as sufficient. She's basically saying the Trump trade deal is fine. We don't need a separate deal here with Canada. Her remarks followed a meeting with Canadian government ministers, which she described as very positive. So guys, there you have it. Poor Canada. Look, I have to say, right? It's nothing against the Canadian people, all right? We're friends. We want to be friends, but it's just a simple reality. You guys have a clown in charge. People, for some odd reason or another, elected this clown to be in charge. And, well, it's hard to take something like international negotiations seriously with Mr. Elbows up here. But that said, how's that going, right? Whatever happened to this, huh? Notice how he doesn't do this anymore. Notice, by the way, in the fashion that he speaks, he no longer has that smile, no longer has that energy. Oh, we're gonna be tough. It sounds defeated constantly. It's like, so we're gonna negotiate with the United States. It's going well. Politicians speak. Oh, the politicians speak fell through because August 1st came and went, and there was no trade deal made. So it's truly an unfortunate situation to watch up there, but frankly, it is what it is. With that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this, guys, in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.